Berkeley, and this is Voices of the Chesapeake Bay. Each week on Voices of the Chesapeake Bay, we bring you an interview with one of the outstanding people from around the Chesapeake Bay region on a variety of subjects.
I'm Bobby Marshall. I'm up here in Claiborne building a boat for Carl Griebel. Been working on it about 5 months, I guess, altogether. I did have a partner helping me. I had Jason Klein helping me, but he decided that he had a better job offer, so he wanted to stay here and do this, but he's got a family and bills to pay and whatnot, so he decided he better try something else. We're looking at a 46-foot Markley hull, and Carl bought the hull. Glenn Manning laid it up. That means he built the hull in a mold. Robert Meekins designed the boat and built the plug to build the mold from. The plug is a boat named Nancy Ellen. Robert went ahead and finished it off and made it into a charter boat. I think there's been 101 or 102 boats come out of this mold. He's from Golden Hill, Maryland, on the way to Hooper's Island. Probably, I don't know how many boats he's built, probably a couple hundred. It's a workboat style, but this one's going to have a little more cabin on it. It's just going to be a bay-built yacht, so to speak, pleasure boat. When I first got mine, when I just got the hull, and I didn't get the molded decks. This one has a molded deck and trunk cabin. When I got the hull and I had it shipped to Tilghman, and I had it down there in this building, and I climb up a ladder and climb down in the hull, it looks like a world in there. You know, you just think, geez, what am I thinking about doing here now? My boat, you get it 30 or 40 or 60 miles out in the ocean, and it's only about as big as your shoe. The farther you go out and the deeper the water is, the smaller your boat gets. I carry fishing parties pretty much all summer. It's a boat named Class Act. It's 47 feet long, single engine like this boat, 2 rudders like this boat, not quite as much cabin, has a flying bridge where this one's not going to have it. And I got it set up to fish in the bay or in the ocean. It's not an ideal boat in the ocean, but an ocean boat is an ideal in the bay, and I've got to fish both places. You need a little more bow in the ocean. Twin engines is better in the ocean, I think, than one engine. But twin engines is twice as much trouble as one engine. Cost about twice as much. Diesels are so dependable now. Hopefully you don't ever get towed in. Keep your fuel clean and all your maintenance on schedule, then you're not going to have too much of a problem. Been about 3 months in the ocean and about 6 months in the bay, I guess. We used to fish with gill net in the wintertime, dredged oysters in the wintertime, hand-tongued for oysters in the wintertime. I used to have a skipjack. I had Virginia W. I had her for about 20 years. Before I bought that skipjack, I wished that all the dredge boats was up in Annapolis Harbor with their masts stuck in the mud. Then I kind of got to sailing with a guy on a boat and really liked it. And then I wound up buying a boat from him, and I had her for about 20 years. The boat's still alive. It was built in 1904 in Guilford, Virginia, and named Virginia W. A guy by the name of Tom Young built it. His grandson lives in Chesapeake, Virginia, and that's where I go in the summertime. So I met him. I didn't realize that it was the grandson of the guy that built that boat back in 1904. But the boat's still alive, and she's down in Kinsale, Virginia, and it's in a working type museum. They've spent a lot of money restoring it, and a guy named Marty Miller owns it now. It's called the Port Kinsale Foundation that he has. It's a museum type thing. Kinsale's on the Ecomico River, I think. It's a branch of the Potomac. You go up the Potomac maybe 10 miles, and it's on the south side of the river. I think Lawrence Murphy's the only one working. Wade's cousin. Wade's just carrying people in the summertime. Only one working one left. Ed Farley, he hasn't worked for a couple years. He's carrying passengers mostly around St. Michael's, but everywhere that he needs to do it. Ed's son used to work for me. About 10 years ago, he came up to me and asked for a job as a mate in the summer. And I said, okay, because I was planning on going to Chesapeake and fishing in the ocean, and you need a mate in the ocean. And I almost fired him. In the bay, he didn't act like he had much interest in it. And then when we got down in the ocean, something clicked in him, and you couldn't ask for a better man. You just couldn't ask for anybody any better. He was really good with the people, and now he's the captain on a boat in Florida. He stayed with me for 4 years. It's about the best thing that a mate can do, you know. If they work with you for a while and then they go on, that's what you want. You want the young guys to go ahead and come up and make something of themselves.
You're listening to an interview with Tilghman Island waterman and charter boat captain Bobby Marshall on Voices of the Chesapeake Bay.
I grew up in Tilghman and in St. Michael's. My grandfather on my mother's side and his family, they lived in Tilghman. And on my father's side, they lived in St. Michael's. I pretty much went from place to place. I kind of feel more at home at Tilghman. I live at Tilghman now. My mother still lives in St. Michael's. But I call Tilghman my home, really. It was really good if you like hunting and fishing and trapping and tromping around in the marsh and stuff. But when those conibear traps came out, you could take a dozen of those traps and you could catch about 8 rats a night. Yeah, I used to do a lot of that. I don't think I ever caught over maybe 10 in one day. No, I don't think I ever had over about 20 traps. When I started out, we had those, they were jump traps, they were called, and they were a foot trap. And sometimes you'd go there and you'd just have a pawl in your trap. You know, if the tide went out during the night and a rat would chew, they wouldn't chew their back leg off much, but they'd chew their front leg off quite a bit. I never did catch a 3-legged rat, but I caught some some pawls once in a while. They come out on dark nights mostly, like rainy and dark nights, and they come out of a lead. In Dorchester County, it's different. Their marshes are different, but these rats around here, they live in the banks, and they make a little lead, a little trough that goes toward the deeper water, and you could find a little place in the lead where you could set a trap. It was fun. Of course, they're not worth anything now. I don't think the hides are worth hardly anything. It was a thing that kids did when you were growing up. You know, we didn't get an allowance most of the time. You know, in the summer you soft crabbed or whatever you did, and you made some money, and in the winter you trapped and made little money. Some of them trapped for raccoons or foxes, but I never did. I really wasn't big in it. It was just a kid thing to do. You know, just something that you did growing up. I've done just about everything. My grandfather, Harrison, Dutch Harrison his name was, Herman Harrison, he started carrying fishing parties in 1919. When he got home from World War I, that next spring he started carrying fishing parties, and he did it up until about 1969 or 70 when he died. I remember going on the boat with him when I was just a real little kid, you know, maybe 5, 6 years old, stand on a box, and he let me steer usually all the way in, sometimes all the way to the dock. 5 or 6 years old. It was a good way to grow up. My grandfather Marshall, he was a house carpenter, but he liked to fish too. But when I was a real little kid, he had some kind of a boat that he fished and stuff in, but he sold it and then he never had one after that. Mostly he was a carpenter. My sister is into this genealogy, and she's tracked them, I don't know how far back, but quite a ways. I think she's gone back past before the Civil War, if I remember this right. I had one relative that was in the Union Army in the Civil War, and he got wounded or sick or something. Anyway, they sent him home out of the Army, so he joined the Confederate Navy. And so, well, that's the way the Eastern Shore was. They had 1 foot on each side of the fence, I guess. Really, Maryland is a southern state. I think it was about just the way the people lived here. It was plantations here and that sort of thing. It was more of a southern style of living. It wasn't industry on this part of Maryland. That's all I've ever wanted to be a waterman. Even when I was in high school, when they put down, you know, you put down what you were going to be. Some of them are going to be a politician or the president or whatever. I put waterman. That's all I've ever did. I spent 4 years in the Coast Guard. I got my captain's license in 1966, the day I turned 18. When I wasn't in school, I was working for a fellow named Jimmy Spurry, who really encouraged me to get the license and stuff. The following summer, I ran a boat for him, and then it was either get drafted into the Army and go to Vietnam or something. So I joined the Coast Guard. I stayed in Charleston, South Carolina for a couple years, and then I was on a ship out of St. Petersburg, Florida for 2 years. I was a bosun mate. I did everything. Ran small boats, shot the big guns on the ship, just whatever. In the Coast Guard, it's not like some other services where you only have one job. In the Coast Guard, you had to know a little bit of everything. There wasn't that many people there. I had my captain's license before I went in, so that was a pretty good deal.
It's Bobby Marshall from Tilghman Island, water.
I bought a bay-built boat that was built in Rock Hall and went right back to carrying fishing parties. And I carried hunting parties a little bit in the winter for geese and ducks. And I gill netted in the winter, perch and rockfish. And I hand-tonged in the winter. I really like doing that. That's fun. You wouldn't think being out there in the freezing cold and ice everywhere, you wouldn't think it'd be fun. But when you're pulling that top line or the bottom line of the net up and you look down in that water and you see those old blue tails on those rockfish are going, you know, and you can feel them in the net sometimes before you see them. To me, it's much fun as catching one on hook and line. The most I ever caught in one day was 6,100 pounds of rockfish. That was a pretty good day. And I've gone for as much as 2 weeks and never caught over 100 pounds a day. But the most I ever caught in one day was 6,100 pounds of rockfish. And I think they were like $3.75 a pound. Of course, there was 2 of us on the boat, but still, that was a good day's work. I don't think you can do that anymore because there's limits on everything. In them days, we didn't think there was any end to it. So that's the way that works. The most oysters I ever caught in one day was 188 bushels. Filled the skipjack right down to the deck level. Decks were right just about awash. My little boat, she was what they call a 100-bushel boat. She really wasn't supposed to have but about 100 on her. The limit in them days was 150 bushels. A couple of times I'd caught 140 or 147. I just kept going with them. And I went right back to the next place the next week and could not find not even a shell on the bottom. It was on Love Point. And when I left there on a Tuesday, we were still counting like 400 oysters to the dredge. Every time we wound the dredges up, it was still like 400 in the dredge. And it was a couple nor'westers come through after that and went back right back to the same spot. And couldn't even get a shell in the dredge. They had sanded over or something had happened. So oysters move up and down in the bottom because of the currents and whatnot. The most I ever caught hand-tonging, my cousin Rex and I caught 77 bushels one time, just the 2 of us. The most I ever caught in one lick hand-tonging, and that's without the pullers or any of the most I ever caught in one lick was 99 marketable size oysters. I could barely get the rakes aboard, but it was during a freeze-up, and it was 3 of us tonging. Johnny Lomax and Leon Cummins and I was tonging, and Leon's father, Lehman, was culling. And we hit a little place, and each one of us was trying to beat the other one. And I caught 99, and on the next lick, Johnny caught 100, and on the next lick, Leon caught 101. Now, Leon's father was counting now, but I guess he wanted us to bail him up there just as fast as we could. But tonging's fun, too. I think we were using 18s that day. Pretty short, really. I can't work myself with anything over about 24s. I'm not big enough. And I don't really even like 24s. I like to work with 20s and 22s, but I think 18s or 16s is best. Shorter than that, I don't like either. They don't balance right. We sold to various markets at Tilghman. When I dredged oysters, I most times sold to Adrian Hansen, sometimes to Buddy Harrison, sometimes to Buck Garvin. Buddy had a shucking house, and he still has one, but I don't think they shuck very many. He buys now mostly for Ronnie Bevins. And I've sold to Ronnie Bevins, too. That's who Hansen buys for. He's down there in Kinsale, Virginia, right next to where my old skipjack is, in fact. And he's about the only big-time oyster buyer left on the whole bay that I know of. He does a lot of planting oysters and is doing research into aquaculture and that kind of stuff. He's dedicated to the oyster business. He really is. It's been a resurgence in the last 2 years in the oyster business. A lot of people quit about the same time I got out of it because they had gotten so scarce you could hardly make a living. Some of them got land jobs and some of them did whatever they could do. But in the last 2 years, oysters has come back good. I think this power dredging law has helped. It allows them to use a light dredge on the certain bottoms, and it turns the bottom over, turns the shells and stuff over. And a lot of areas that were pretty much barren have come back. So if it's done right, I think dredging is the best way to go. If it's done right, it produces, not to take anything away from the tongers, because tonging's a way of life too, but I think dredging produces a better oyster. It's cleaner, it's more uniform in shape. I think it's a better oyster, but I don't think dredging is the total answer, because up the creeks and stuff where the bottom is softer, I think it would tear the bars up too much. I think you're going to have to stay tonging up there. But I think in the rivers and in the bay, I think dredging's the way to go. I think dredging's better for the bottom than pounding tonging. Where it used to be, I'll use fishing for example, where it used to be maybe 15 or so fishing rigs, gill net rigs, now it's only maybe 8. You know, it's about half of the amount of rigs. Trot lining, the boats are bigger. They just plain got to work harder to make anything, you know, and of course they got to make more to pay their bills anyhow. They're getting better prices, but the prices aren't any better in relation to the economy than they were 20 years ago. A gallon of diesel fuel, if it's $2.50, they've got to catch X number of fish or crabs or oysters or whatever to pay for that fuel. Where 20 years ago, they had to catch the same amount to pay for that fuel. The most I ever got for oysters, I got $36 a bushel one time. That was in about 1980, I guess. And I've also sold them for $2 a bushel. And that wasn't too much ahead of that. That was probably in about 72. So you got to get some money for your stuff nowadays. You gotta. I don't think that the dockside prices bother the demand at all. The people that are buying them up in the cities, they're the same way. Where we sold a bushel to, say, Buddy Harrison for $2, and he sold a bushel for $3 or whatever he got for them, and they were $20 when they got to the city. Now they're $100 when they get to the city, but everything else has gone up too. I don't think that the dockside prices bother the demand at all. I really don't.
Voices of the Chesapeake Bay, produced and hosted by Michael Buckley with assistance from Claudia Donegan, Dr. Robin Young, and the Voices theme song is by Deanna Dove.